Greetings everyone, this is Rambling Collector, back here with another Warhammer 40,000 book review for all of you today. So, you guys requested it, and I have delivered. Today I will be reviewing the Crimson Fists Omnibus, the winner of the last Warhammer Omnibus poll, by Steve Parker and Mike Lee. And I will say, I cannot thank you all enough for recommending this omnibus to me. I'm very excited to see what you all recommend the next time. But, let's get started. So first up, to give it a little bit of context, I did not know anything about the Crimson Fists. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Which is why I was actually surprised when I found this at my local Barnes & Noble and decided to pick it up to add it to the Warhammer book collection. But, with it sitting on the shelf for a while, and only now starting to go through the Warhammer omnibuses, I feel like I should be kicking myself for not reading this sooner. Which is why I can't thank you all enough for recommending that I read this one for my next Warhammer Omnibus review. So, to start with, this book overall was a great spotlight on an underappreciated Space Marine chapter, with a total of 2 novels, a novella, and 4 short stories to their name. And all of this is told over the course of 664 pages in total. As you all know, that's a bit of a dangerous one away from 2 more numbers, and we would have had a deadly one. But, regardless, this entire omnibus, save for one short story that I can think of, tells the story of the defense of Rynn's world, the Crimson Fists' home planet, against the Orcs, which offered a great spotlight in the Orcs as a serious menace, with their increasing tactics and intelligence. Before this, I never really saw much of the Orcs in action. I'd only seen a lot of Tyranids or Chaos Space Marines or a little bit of Tau or Eldar, which the Eldar were more or less an ally of the Imperium in some way, shape, or form. But regardless, this was my first time that I can remember seeing the Orcs as a major threat, which was definitely fun to see. And I'm actually curious to see some other Orc-based stories in the future, but more or less Orc-centric stories, is what I should say. But the one thing that definitely surprised me is that with a lot of the Space Marine stories I'd read before, of them having this holier-than-thou attitude, it surprised me that the Crimson Fists had a great amount of humanity to them, showing care for the common human citizen whilst defending their home. Which makes sense, it is their home planet and its citizens that they vowed to protect. So I guess in that case it would make sense, but even then, showing some shape of compassion for the human citizenry around them, whereas normally Space Marines have this more holier-than-thou attitude, saying that they are above the common man or woman. But this shows that they have the capacity for compassion, and that it is not just the salamanders who can show this type of attitude towards regular Imperial citizens. And once again, seeing the Orcs as a major threat was fun. However, I will say, this omnibus can be a bit staggering or stagnant at times, when its primary focus is of course the Crimson Fists' home world, which is important. But because it is confined to a single location, it's not quite as gripping as some of the other omnibuses I've read, which have bounced around from multiple different locations in the past, so this one was definitely a little bit more, I want to say, difficult to get through than the last few ones I have read before. But that does not detract from its quality. So, to continue this review, I will go over the 2 main novels that are in this little collection. For that, we will first start with Rynn's World by Steve Parker. So, first on this list is Rynn's World by Steve Parker, part of the Space Marine Battles series, done way back when, and the first story of the Crimson Fists Omnibus. So first of all, some big highlights. Our main point of view character, Chapter Master Pedro Cantor. He was a fascinating character, prioritizing not only the survival of his chapter, but the civilians of Rynn's world. Now, the Crimson Fists unfortunately start off at a severe disadvantage, when, during the opening salvos of the defense of their home world, Not only are the orcs jumping straight into orbit of the planet just to bombard them, which is not only a major cost to them, but is ultimately sneak attacking onto the Imperial blockade, which has barely had any time to form whatsoever, jumping from what they thought they had weeks to prepare to merely a few days at most. But during the opening salvos of the defense of their home world, one of the surface-to-air missiles that is launched from their home base, the Arx Tyrannus, malfunctions and flies right back into an underground storage depot containing a vast amount of ammunition, which detonates, destroying the entirety of the Arx Tyrannus, wiping out at least half of their chapter, as well as a good amount of their supplies, gene seed, everything, except for 16 Marines, and those who were camped in other bases, such as New Rynn City. So already the Crimson Fists suffer a major casualty, which brings them to the near extinction right from the start of the story. But because of this opens the way to a great mix of survival warfare, with Pedro Cantor and his party marching to New Rynn City from the ruins of Arx Tyrannus, surviving wave after wave of orcs surrounding the entire planet, and even saving some human civilians along the way, before switching to defensive attrition, where the Crimson Fist stationed in New Rynn City defend the main capital from an ongoing wave of orcs, ranging from simply giving up ring after ring of walls, showcasing that the Crimson Fists, as a chapter based from the Imperial Fists Legion of Space Marines, are great at defensive warfare, or defensive siege warfare, I should say. Whereas the polar opposites, the Iron Warriors, are good at cracking open fortresses. The Imperial Fists and all their offshoot chapters are great at defensive siege warfare, and it is not more highlighted than during here with the Crimson Fists defending the capital city. But this all culminates when they make one final strike, one major offensive to retake the spaceport, after confirming that Allied reinforcements are on the way. They make it their business to crack open the spaceport, take it from orc hands, and essentially save their homeworld from utter destruction, which results in Pedro Cantor actually having a final duel with the orc war boss responsible for all of this, Snagrod, the arch-arsonist of Caradon. And I must say, it was a fantastic duel from start to finish, watching first these two bosses face off against ranged combat at first, before switching to full melee smackdown. And I must say, it was glorious to behold. Not only that, but seeing another Crimson Fist chapter legend, Alicio Cortez, taking on another orc, and losing an arm in the process, because we thought he was dead, but surprise, he jumps up out of nowhere, missing an arm. And then he has the gall to crack a joke about it when Pedro Cantor is saying, "Brother, you're severely wounded and missing an arm." With Alicio Cortez actually commenting, "I'm not missing an arm, brother. See, it's right over there." Have I mentioned I love some of the banter between soldiers that is shown throughout Warhammer? It is brilliant, and it is dark, but also funny in that sense of just like, "Hey buddy, you missing an arm? Nope, it's right over there." I love the bond that is shown between Pedro Cantor and Alicio Cortez. Both of these are monumental figures within the Crimson Fists chapter, but Alicio Cortez is more focused on striking hard, striking fast, going out in a blaze of glory, while Pedro Cantor is interested more in the long game of just the chapter surviving, rather than just simple revenge. While that is one of his focuses, his priority right now is the survival of his homeworld and what remains of his Crimson Fist chapter, to the point that he even enacts the Ceres Protocol, which is an emergency protocol that is engaged with all Astartes, where any Astartes of a chapter that is almost doomed to extinction has to prioritize their survival above all other things. Which is kind of messed up, but considering the situation that they're in, I do not blame him for enacting that protocol. However, While all of this is going on, we have another story being told in Legacy of Dorn by Mike Lee, which I will talk about right now. Next up, we have Legacy of Dorn by Mike Lee, the second novel in this collection, which, oddly enough, when I first started this omnibus, I assumed that it was going to be a separate story. Like, we'd already seen the defense of Rynn's world and how they had managed to survive with Pedro Cantor. I was thinking, okay, are we about to get another story of them fighting orcs? Which we did, but just not in the way that I was thinking. So Legacy of Dorn, surprisingly enough, takes place around the same time as Rynn's world, showcasing another surviving team of Crimson Fists trapped behind enemy lines. This team, however, is led by Captain Gallius, a veteran of the Ordo Xenos of the Space Marines' Death Watch organization. Now, the Death Watch, for those of you who do not know, are sort of an elite squad, or I guess you could say elite squadrons of troopers who are tasked with hunting down particular alien groups, whether it's orcs, Eldar, or even such things as the Tau. Their whole premise is to track down alien threats. And it is a whole thing where if you work with the Death Watch, you are seen as an elite warrior amongst your fellow Space Marines, which, with the Crimson Fists having as many as they do, surprisingly enough, as it is showcased both, especially here in Legacy of Dorn, with Captain Gallius and a few others, are all veterans of the Ordo Xenos and the Death Watch, which is fascinating, because it shows that they have experience taking down aliens, especially orcs. But with this one, it is again not a happy ending, when they find out that the Ox Tyrannus is destroyed, but before then, they are actually knocked out with a massive explosion and put into a comatose state for a while, with Captain Gallius and his team. And I want to say that their main rival is not Snagrod, like it is with Pedro Cantor, but another orc boss called Rotschrek. And I'm going to say this right now, Rotschrek was a nasty piece of work. No matter how many times you blew him up or shot at him, he would always manage to come back right to the end of the novel. And I'm like, will this guy ever just die already? But with this story, we get another interesting take of warfare. Because this one, the Crimson Fists are outgunned, outnumbered, and they are right behind enemy lines. So they are forced to fight for not only their own survival, but the humans who are working with them. So they engage in multiple instances of guerrilla warfare, trying to delay the orcs and their advances against New Rynn City, trying to protect the city from the outskirts, doing things like targeting supply convoys, or taking out manufactories, or at the very least just trying to do delay tactics for the orcs, trying to help the defenders in any way they possibly could. But that was not the biggest highlight here. The biggest highlight, to me at least, throughout this whole novel, which this one was definitely the most one that I had difficulty with, but when I kept reading through it, it got more and more fluid. But one of the biggest highlights was watching these proud warriors, who are 7 to 9 feet tall, proud warriors and veterans of multiple battles across the entire galaxy, having to compromise and work with regular human troopers, just for the sake of their own survival. And it was fascinating to watch them as they had this kind of holier-than-thou attitude, having to bend their pride after nearly losing everything, with the pride of Space Marines being the only thing they had. And Captain Gallius was at least willing to compromise, but we see him having friction with a lot of his teammates. In particular, his right hand, Oliver, a Space Marine who essentially lost an eye, first thing in the novel, but throughout it all, he was definitely the most vocal against their actions of constantly looking out for the humans. But they still did it, even raiding this massive medical facility which had orcs experimenting with humans, using them as test subjects for some of their evil experiments. Well, I say evil, but I want to say more cruel experiments, is the way I'd put it instead, which has them fighting in an underground base, looking after the humans, trying to do supply runs, teaching them the ways of guerrilla warfare, bringing them up to where they are competent in the Space Marines' eyes, and even splitting up their own forces into squadrons to have each Space Marine working with a squadron of humans, which was a fascinating take, watching both types of humanity, both superhuman and regular human, fighting side by side and working as a more cohesive unit day by day, learning to have to compromise and work together. It was fascinating to watch these two go together, these two factions who are so very different, be so much alike in so many different behaviors. It was good. It was good story writing. I must say, Mike Lee did a fantastic job with this. And one of the biggest highlights was watching the survivors make one final strike because they see the orcs raising their massive weapons of war, gargants, which are the equivalent of ginormous scrapyard mechs that the orcs create to bring down a target completely when they think the fight is taking too long. And what do? They break inside one of these things, commandeer it, and use it to take on some of the other orc gargants, as if this novel could not get any cooler in the final half of it. It was amazing, and it gripped me from start to finish, and reinvigorated me to keep reading the rest of the omnibus. I must say that. It really did its part. When at first I was floundering, it managed to pull itself back from the brink and really hyped me up to read the rest of the omnibus. I was hooked. So all in all, Legacy of Dorn has a slow start to it, but gradually builds up to a very satisfying climax. Now, let's move on to random thoughts. Okay, so random thoughts. I've got to say, after reading a lot of the Chaos stories, it was nice to be able to focus on the Imperium of Man and some of the more Loyalist chapters for a while, especially after reading both the Fabius Bile trilogy, Ahriman, as well as, of course, the Iron Warriors Omnibus, which I had done a review of previously, before deciding on the next poll. And I must say, again, it was good to dive into more of the Loyalist chapters. Will I be picking up more omnibuses of them? Maybe in the future, but for right now, I've still got far too many in my collection that remain unread to continue doing that. But, regardless, one of the biggest highlights, once again, was the surprising compassion and companionship that was shown with the Crimson Fists amongst regular humans. One of the biggest ones that I think of is when, as they're escorting civilians from the outskirts who had barely survived being attacked by orcs, we see Pedro Cantor seeing this young woman, who is a mother of multiple children, carrying her youngest, trying to keep up with these titanic masters of warfare, right up until she collapses. And instead of giving her what is known as the Emperor's Mercy, aka Mercy Kill, what he does is that he picks her up in his arms, cradles her, and tells her, "You have done your part, now it is my turn to help you." And he has the other Space Marines assist in carrying some of the other children. And that was actually a heartwarming moment. Another one for me was definitely in Legacy of Dorn, which has more companionship moments. But even so, there was also a heartbreaking moment as well. One of the best ones was having the Crimson Fists, one of them training the regular human soldiers. And from there, he's like demonstrating how an orc fights, swinging slowly, being a big old dumb brute. And then at one point, after knocking the human soldiers onto their backs, he goes up and says, "I'm an orc. I'm big, dumb, stupid, and I'm not going to give you any mercy. Pick up your weapons and try again." Just the sheer comedic timing of that was just perfect. I loved it. But another moment that to me was heartbreaking was how one of the Crimson Fists under Captain Gallius, Titus Juno, a master of combat, practically adopted this young woman and her two children in his own way. He was very distant about it, but you can definitely tell that he cared in some way, with the fact that the children kind of clung to him like he was their father figure, as well as their hero. Which is why it hurt all the more when, at one point, as these Crimson Fists, these soldiers are witnessing human civilians that they have grown attached to being tortured by the orcs, and not only just the orcs, but Rotshrek, their personal enemy. Watching Juno himself pull the trigger on this mother and children. It was heartbreaking to realize that he had grown attached to these humans, and he was the one who had to pull the trigger. And it's even more highlighted on when, in a future story with these same characters, we see Juno having the 3 skulls of this mother and 2 children strapped to his pauldron as a way to remember them. It is grisly, but when you think about it and the ramifications of it, the meaning behind it, it becomes a heart-rending reminder that the Warhammer universe is not for the faint of heart. It's dark, it's depressing, and a lot of times there will be moments that will make you cry. But that is what I love about the Crimson Fists, their attachment to their humanity above all else. Kind of like the Salamanders, in a way. And while they did have their moments of pride, they were willing to bend them and work alongside their fellow humans and even care for them in some capacity, which really made this collection worth reading. So, with all this being said, let's move on to the overall score. So, with all this being said, the overall score I'm going to give the Crimson Fists Omnibus is a good 8 out of 10. While it can be slow at times and a bit of a slog, it is one that I do recommend if you want to see especially Imperium versus Orcs in major detail. And there's a lot more to offer as well throughout this collection, especially if you want to see soldiers, or super soldiers in this case, who have more of a humane side to them, rather than just being, well, massive pricks is the way I'd put it. But if you also want to see a more defensive story, of pride, of defending your home, this is one that I do recommend. And if you guys follow my channel, I will be posting another poll to decide the next Warhammer Omnibus to dive into. Some of them might take longer than others, but it'll be worth it to finally dive into these major stories. Once again, I cannot thank you all enough for recommending this omnibus to me, and I am very excited to see which one you all have me dive into and review next. Warhammer is vast, and I'm more than willing to read more of it. So, if you guys like this video, feel free to leave a like, comment your thoughts on it down below, and if you like what I do, feel free to subscribe and follow my channel for more. The support is more than appreciated, you guys. From one reader to others, I cannot say enough, thank you for watching this video. Once again, keep reading, my fellow readers. This is Rambling Collector, signing off. Have a great evening.